The subcommittee will come to order. Today, the subcommittee will consider in markup session H.R. 3101, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2009. I'll recognize myself for an opening statement. The legislation that we have before us today was introduced by our subcommittee colleague, Mr. Markey, and modernizes the laws governing access to communications services by individuals with disabilities. As we learned during the legislative hearing conducted by the subcommittee earlier this month, there are almost 1 million Americans who have severe or profound hearing loss and another 1 million Americans who are legally blind. 4% of our population has great difficulty hearing, and an additional 3% are visually impaired. And Americans are aging. There are approximately 40 million people over the age of 65 living in the nation today. That's about 13% of our population. One estimate shows that by the year 2050, that number will more than double to 88.5 million, or an estimated one-fifth of our national population. Naturally, this growth in the aging population will be accompanied by an increase in the number of Americans who are vision or hearing impaired and who will need accessible telecommunications products and services. With the explosion of Internet-delivered services, both the variety of information and entertainment offerings and the complexity and variety of the devices that receive those services have multiplied. Our challenge is to assure that all Americans can benefit from these advances, including the individuals with vision or hearing impairments. This year marks the 20th anniversary of enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've come a long way in the 2 decades since 1990, but we can do more through both voluntary steps on the part of industry and also targeted regulation to ensure the accessibility of all technologies to persons with disabilities. H.R. 3101 is a useful contribution to that progress. In the tradition of this subcommittee for the past month, members and staff have been engaged in a bipartisan process to consider modifications to the bill as introduced. And I want to thank and commend the ranking Republican member of our subcommittee, Mr. Stearns, and his excellent staff for their cooperation and for their very constructive suggestions, a number of which are contained in the amendment in the nature of the substitute, which will be considered during this session today. I also want to thank the representatives of the hearing and vision impaired communities and of industry for their cooperative work with us over the course of the last month. I'll be offering today an amendment in the nature of a substitute that embodies the results of the work that we've done so far. But our bipartisan collaborative effort is a work in progress, and we will continue to modify H.R. 3101 in the time between today's markup and when the full committee takes this bill up during the month of July. Today's markup is designed to expedite the process with the goal of having H.R. 3101 be reported by the full committee and be approved by the House during the later part of this summer. I encourage member staff and interested stakeholders to apply themselves to the resolution of the remaining points of difference. Those conversations will be taking place during the coming 2 weeks, and our goal will be to resolve all of the remaining points of difference and have a truly consensus-based bill that is considered then by the full committee. That concludes my opening statement. I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and let me also commend you and your staff for allowing us to have an opportunity to change and to improve the bill. I think all of us in this room realize it's important that people with disabilities not left be behind. No one wants that. Everybody should be afforded the opportunity to use and enjoy the wide variety of technological devices that are available today. I think, as I mentioned, we can all agree upon that point. The question is then becomes, what is the best way, of course, to achieve this goal? Do we need more government regulation, or do we need to allow the markets to work with as light as a regulatory touch as possible? The incredible technological innovations we've seen over the past decades were made possible because of this light touch, and we cannot just mandate certain technological advances or pick winners and losers. The best approach to ensure accessibility, as I said, is to establish accessibility goals, but not necessarily dictate how to accomplish them. That way we can allow innovation to flourish. Now, under the Communications Act, manufacturers and carriers are already required to make telecommunication devices and services accessible to people with disabilities when doing so is, quote, readily achievable, end quote. The statute also requires telephones to be hearing aid compatible, requires telecommunication providers to help pay for operators that relay phone conversations between people with hearing or speech disabilities and people without disabilities, and requires television programming to be closed caption. Nevertheless, my colleagues, we are becoming victims of our own success. Due to the success of our deregulatory policies, many new technologies have simply evolved, and they do not fall within the existing statutory language. While I believe the manager's amendment will improve the bill, obviously we believe more work needs to be done. I remain concerned about the overall scope of the bill. Even as amended, it would require service providers and equipment manufacturers to make each feature of each device and service accessible for each disability, unless they can demonstrate that doing so is not achievable, regardless of the extent to which they make other devices and services accessible. This does not allow the necessary flexibility providers and manufacturers need in order to innovate. Another concern is that the bill gives the FCC authority to expand the video description requirement on networks and pay TV providers beyond the 50 hours per quarter the FCC originally imposed, even though the D.C. Circuit struck down that original requirement. The court found that the FCC lacked the proper authority to implement that requirement. There is a growing willingness among programmers and pay TV providers to meet the original mandate. They are not yet comfortable with giving the FCC authority to expand the obligation before they have fully implemented the initial 50-hour obligation. I believe we should continue to discuss this issue going forward. In many areas, industry is already taking the necessary steps to make certain that their products and applications are accessible to all people. For example, the iPad, has been lauded as revolutionary, not just by the general public, but also by accessibility advocates because it includes breakthrough accessibility features. This suggests that the broad market could be providing better access to people with disabilities than it does today. Conversely, if the iPad had been subject to detailed mandates, such as requirements regarding the design of raised buttons, the flat-screen device might not have made it to market. The goals of this bill, H.R. 3101, are certainly laudable, and we can all agree on the final destination, namely, ensure that all people are able to take advantage of the remarkable technology that is available today. As we move through the legislative process, I hope we can continue to work together to strike the right balance and make changes that would better support our shared accessibility goals and our goals of promoting innovation. We are not yet there. We're certainly moving in the right direction, and as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to commend both the Democrat and Republican staff for their bipartisan cooperation in crafting the substitute amendment. I hope the ongoing discussions will continue, and I look forward to the markup. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. And let me again thank you and your staff for your excellent cooperation as we have made the changes that are reflected in today's manager's amendment. And in the succeeding 2 weeks, we do intend to address, through that same collaborative process, the issues that you raised today. And I will say that I share many of the concerns that you have mentioned in your statement, and we will try to resolve all of that. The gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Gordon, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did an excellent job in laying out the need for this important bill. So let me just congratulate Mr. Markey for bringing it forth and for his collaborative approach. And as Mr. Stearns has pointed out, and I hope that we'll continue that collaboration and get the bill that you pointed out by, hopefully by end of July.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gordon. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to thank you for their work with the ranking member. I think we're moving in the right direction, and as long as your leadership allows you to help craft this thing, I think we can get in good shape for a good bipartisan vote. The Apple ATT iPhone store has been well documented. 1.7 million iPhones in 3 days, accessible, and really a phenomenon that I don't think people would have ever guessed unless we let American ingenuity and the market drive the needs. And so that's really part of the issue on our side is the market does work as long as we allow it to do that. Issues of concern that I have is let's don't let the FCC, don't give them broad guidelines. Let's give them some structure. They got enough on their plate without them trying to make some determinations. The other thing is on the video description issues that are raised. I do have some concerns on that, but I too want to join in thanking our ranking member and you, Mr. Chairman, for working with us, and I look forward to further communication as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimkus. The chairman of the Full Energy and Commerce Committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher, for scheduling today's markup, and thank you, Ranking Member Barton and Ranking Member Stearns, for your contributions to this process. Bipartisan committee staff and Mr. Markey's staff have been working cooperatively on H.R. 3101, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, so we can bring a bipartisan consensus bill to the House floor in time for the 20th anniversary of the landmark Americans for Disabilities Act on July 26. 3 weeks ago at our hearing on H.R. 3101, I said that I hope to see a bill that meets the needs of the disabled community while providing industry with the flexibility and incentives it needs to achieve the bill's goals. The manager's amendment that Mr. Boucher will offer today makes great strides in that direction. The amendment responds to industry concerns in a number of ways. The applicable legal standard has been changed from undue burden to achievable. This will allow industry more flexibility in meeting the bill's requirements. The FCC has been given authority to exempt so-called multifunction devices, equipment that can be utilized for a variety of purposes, so that standards meant to apply to communication services are not necessarily applied to all of the features of devices. And the method that will be employed to develop technical standards related to video programming has been moved from the FCC to a technical advisory committee in order to allow industry engineers to quickly devise standards. Although we have made substantial progress, there are a few areas I hope we can improve upon before the bill is considered by the full committee. For example, although I am pleased that the manager's amendment permits the FCC to increase the number of hours of video described programming available to consumers, I want to explore ways to bring this capability to a wider audience. I know there are outstanding issues, and I'm committed to working with Chairman Boucher and the ranking members, Barton and Stearns, to address them before the full committee markup. As we discuss some of these issues today, and as we move this bill forward, I urge my colleagues to stay focused on the underlying purpose of our effort, to ensure that Americans with disabilities can participate in the same digital society we all do. This legislation will make a significant difference in the lives of millions of Americans, and I urge my colleagues to support the manager's amendment. Thank you again, Chairman Boucher, for your leadership, and Mr. Markey for your tireless efforts to bring 21st century communications to all.
Thank you very much, Chairman Waxman. The gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Booyer, passes on his opening statement. The gentleman from Nebraska. Mr. Terry is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had the opportunity over the last several weeks to visit with members of our disabled community with a variety of different disabilities and needs, and have been literally wowed by the technology that has developed just within the last couple of years to aid in the communication and reception. So I appreciate Chairman Waxman's remarks and share his thoughts that our duty here is to balance making sure that we keep that innovation and allow the tech markets to develop these products, but without the interference from government. Or I worry, though, that maybe this is a government step too far and could actually quash or limit the technical innovations that have emerged in the last couple years. So while we focus on this bill as it's written today, I want to make sure that we continue to work and find that balance. And in that, I think we can have a tech community that will be a great asset and a real victory for our disabled community. And that's the goal that I have with today's legislation. I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Terry. Gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this important legislation forward, and to the both of the ranking members for their work on this, and for all the stakeholders. I can't help but think that in every effort that we're involved in when it comes to telecommunications, we're constantly trying to push the edges of the envelope out, to get the industry to do that, to make sure that we do it legislatively. And I think that this legislation, which we are so grateful to Mr. Markey for writing and bringing forward, says to those with disabilities in our country that they too are going to enjoy full citizenship, that every technology that is available be available to everyone, and that accessibility is a great source of pride to all of us. So thank you, and I look forward to voting on this and seeing it move forward, and God willing, seeing the President sign it into law. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eshoo. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Griffith, is recognized for 3 minutes. And the gentleman passes. The gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I join others in saying thank you for moving this forward and doing so in a bipartisan manner. I also have concerns over some of the lingering issues that are there, to make certain that we are not going to take steps that end up restricting innovation and causing some undue oversight or government intervention. In that vein, the FCC, giving too much authority to the FCC is a concern that I have. I have had concerns over the steps they've taken to try to impose net neutrality, and in that regard, looking at the legislation, I want to make certain that any authority that is given is very explicit, and that there is congressional oversight, that they will be coming back to us with that information, and that we don't just delegate items to the rulemaking process. Look forward to continuing the work, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Christensen, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as was already referenced, on July 26th, we'll celebrate the 20th anniversary of the American with Disabilities Act. And I pride myself in saying that I've been a lifelong advocate for the health needs of individuals with disabilities. So I'm pleased today that we have the opportunity to look at another very important part of our daily lives, which we take for granted, that it would be easily accessible to everyone, but it's not. Today, technology has advanced at a rate that is changing every day. It's almost impossible to keep up with the rapid pace, and we need to be mindful that our population who have special needs are not left behind. It is important that we provide individuals who have disabilities access to the latest broadband services, equipment, and video programming devices. It's more important for them than it is for the rest of the population, actually. So I'd like to congratulate Congressman Markey for this legislation and applaud his efforts to champion the needs of individuals living with disabilities. I commend you to Chairman Boucher and Ranking Member Stearns for your efforts to date in working with all stakeholders to produce a bill to ensure that people who have that special needs have access to digital devices. It's my understanding that some positive changes have been made, but that it's still a work in progress. One of those areas is ensuring that there's consistency in how the obligations are applied. While our first priority is to provide equal access to the disabled population, we should be careful not to create unintended consequences in our requirements that might thwart this important effort. This goal takes collaboration between regulators and the private industry, as well as the persons who would be utilized, who we seek to give access to. And I look forward to working with all stakeholders as this bill continues to make its way through the committee process. Thank you, and I yield back to the
Thank you very much, Ms. Christensen. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Stearns, I want to thank you for holding the markup today on H.R. 3101, the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. With the latest technology and innovations in the marketplace, it is important that individuals with disabilities have access to Internet-related communications and equipment. The previous legislative hearing on this bill provided many ideas and suggestions for improving the bill to assist in obtaining broad consensus for the legislation. The Internet and all the communication services related to it is an important tool for employment opportunities. It is also a gateway for individuals to be connected to their greater community. Access to the Internet is important for all citizens as technology continues to advance. While continuing to work on this legislation, the subcommittee needs to work with all the stakeholders to ensure that the benefits of the Internet are extended to people with disabilities without placing mandates on private industry that curbs innovation. I'm glad that the committee is moving forward with this legislation. However, I believe that more work needs to be done between now and a markup in the full committee. One of the concerns I have is that the factors the FCC will use to determine what is achievable standards are still too broad. There needs to be an appropriate middle ground struck between considering the resources available to a manufacturer or provider and those resources devoted to a specific product or product line. Another concern I have is with the section of the bill related to video description. There are reports that this technology can be very helpful to those in the visually impaired community, but it hasn't been widely distributed or tested. I think it is necessary to have the FCC report back to Congress on how the video description has worked prior to rulemaking. I would suggest that the FCC would recommend that Congress expand those obligations. However, they should not be able to expand them on their own. I am hopeful that the interested stakeholder groups will continue to work through some of the remaining issues in the legislation prior to the full committee markup. The legislation is important as to provide better access to all individuals with vision, hearing, and other disabilities of these Internet-enabled communication services, equipment, and software. I look forward to continuing to work on this important issue, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Latta. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Melanson, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. As we approach the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act, I'd like to thank the chairman and the committee for advancing legislation that will bring equality to modern technology. The 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act is an important step forward for individuals with disabilities, including many of our nation's veterans, and I applaud Mr. Markey, Mr. Stearns, and you, Chairman Boucher, for your leadership on this issue. As our technology advances and our horizons broaden, it's imperative that fairness keep pace with technology. Today, communication services and equipment allow us to keep in touch with family, experience arts and culture, learn outside a classroom, and even call for help in times of emergency. Universal access to these advantages is vital to ensuring that we move forward together as a nation. I'd like to thank the many stakeholders that came to the table to help us create legislation that will achieve this goal. We have all benefited from business-driven innovation, and today I am proud to vote for a bill that will extend the reach of these advances. As we work towards this goal, it is my hope that every citizen of Louisiana and this country will benefit from these efforts, and that populations with disabilities in rural areas like South Louisiana will have the same access guaranteed to those in our nation's urban centers. Men and women with disabilities in rural regions often experience additional challenges associated with the lack of local services. And I ask that we take a step forward narrowing this disparity with regard to telecommunications by creating equal standards for rural and urban areas. This bill will make a difference for men and women across the country whose lives will be made easier and whose abilities more effective, and I look forward to supporting it today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palanson. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Space, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you and Ranking Member Stearns and, of course, Chairman Markey for your great work on such a very important subject, and have a more detailed statement I would submit for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Space. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, principal author of the bill before us today, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much, and I can't thank you enough for all the work that you have put into bringing us to this point. We would not be here without you and Mr. Stearns, working with Chairman Waxman and all of the members who have an interest in this issue. I've never thought of these technology issues as partisan. I've always thought of them as participatory, because we all have a stake in ensuring that every American has access to the most modern technologies. And this legislation is bipartisan, and it is something that I think is going to make a big difference. The amendment, in the nature of a substitute, reflects the bipartisan process, and I hope that we can continue to work together between now and the full committee. There are provisions in the amendment in the nature of a substitute that I look forward to working and refining. One of these is the Commission's authority with respect to reinstatement of the video description regulations that were vacated by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2002. Section 202 would reinstate the video description rules, which is a welcome and much needed reform that is long overdue. However, the language as currently drafted sets up an unnecessarily lengthy 2-year process for reinstatement that would still exclude millions of Americans who are blind from the audio descriptions of the on-screen action that they need to fully enjoy television and hear what they cannot see. And that's because in Section 202, the reinstated regulations apply to only the top 25 markets. So if you're blind or visually impaired and you live in New York, you will be protected. But if you live in Nashville, you are not. If you live in Orlando, you will be protected if you're blind. But if you live in New Orleans, you are not. If you're blind, the restrictions in Section 202 prevent you from fully enjoying television just because you live in a smaller media market. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. In addition to applying to only the top 25 media markets, the old FCC rules also exempted any cable, satellite, or telecom company with less than 50,000 subscribers, regardless of where you lived, even in a larger city. I think our job should be just to make sure that we kind of think it all through between now and full committee so that we don't have an unfair result, so that blind people are not disadvantaged just because they happen to live in smaller, more rural parts of the country. And finally, as currently constructed, Section 202 would make such remedies difficult because if the Commission determines to issue additional regulations that go beyond the old FCC rules, it must wait another 2 years after completing its reports to Congress. So this is a very, very good bill. By the way, CBS and PBS are already doing much of that audio that I was talking about, and they're doing it voluntarily for programs like Nova and American Experience and Clifford the Big Red Dog that goes all across the country and has that kind of audio description. So I think there's got to be a way we can work it out so that every blind person in America has access to it. But I can't thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't thank Mrs. Stearns and all of you, led by the chairman of the full committee as well, for your excellent work, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll waive my opening statement.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania waives. The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just hope we're all going to be working on a few additional ideas to the bill that's so important, number one, and I've got some amendments we'll be offering and withdrawing that I think will help expand the scope of this, and we'll wait for me to offer those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Inslee. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Stupak, is recognized for 3 minutes.
I'll waive, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stupak. That concludes opening statements by members of the subcommittee, and the chair now calls up H.R. 3101. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3101. This act may be cited as the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2009.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. And the chair has an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3101 offered by Mr. Boucher of Virginia.
And I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read. Without objection, it shall be considered as read, and I will recognize myself for an explanation. The amendment embodies the modifications that have to date been agreed to during the bipartisan process that we have undertaken during the last month. It reflects constructive suggestions received from the disabilities community, from industry, from interested members, and from staff. Our goal is to offer an additional manager's amendment at the full committee markup next month that will resolve the remaining points of difference, some of which members have referenced in their opening statements today. This amendment, in the nature of a substitute, makes a number of significant changes to the bill as introduced. Among these are the following. The measure as introduced required that equipment and services used to access the Internet be accessible to the disabled, unless making them accessible would result in an undue burden on the equipment manufacturer or the service provider. That undue burden standard has, in this amendment, been changed to one of achievability, meaning with reasonable effort or expense. And the FCC will determine what is achievable by evaluating a list of factors enumerated in the amendment, including the cost of device modifications and the effect of providing accessibility on the operation of the equipment or the device. The substitute also creates an advisory committee comprised of disabilities community advocates and industry representatives that will make recommendations regarding the availability of closed captioning, video description, and other accessible technology. Then the amendment requires the FCC to adopt requirements for the display of closed captioning or video programming on the Internet within 6 months after receiving the advisory committee's report, and to adopt requirements for access to video description and emergency information on video programming on the Internet within 1 year of receiving those recommendations. The substitute also directs the FCC to adopt the video description requirements that were previously struck down by the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, and describes when and how the FCC may augment those requirements. It requires all pay TV service providers to make set-top boxes or equivalent devices fully accessible. It gives the industry flexibility to meet the requirement that remote controls have a designated button to activate closed captioning. It allows the Commission to exempt products and services like video game systems from the requirements of the Act if those products or services are designed for multiple purposes and are capable of accessing an advanced communication service such as VoIP, but are primarily designed for activities other than using the advanced communication services. It adds a provision that affords liability protection where a service provider is operating as a broadband conduit or where a service provider is making the existence of third-party accessibility software known to consumers. And it conforms provisions addressing hearing aid compatibility of telephones to language in the Senate companion bill to which the stakeholders have indicated agreement. It makes other less significant changes, but those are the principal ones. As I indicated during the opening statement, fundamental differences do remain on a number of points. Mr. Stearns and other members have indicated what some of those are. And I want to encourage all who have worked so well together to produce the changes embodied in this amendment to continue the efforts and the work and resolve the remaining differences during the coming 2 weeks. That concludes my statement, and I urge adoption of the amendment. Does any other member seek recognition on the manager's amendment? The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Mr. Chairman, I think just for the record, I have some questions for counsel that I'm referring to this new achievability standard that I mentioned earlier is defined on page 14 of the amendment. Obviously, many of us think it could be improved. It has been improved, but I thought I'd ask counsel each of these questions quickly. Do I understand correctly that service providers and device manufacturers would still be required, even under the manager's amendment, to make every feature of every advanced communication service or device accessible for every disability, unless they can demonstrate that doing so is not achievable for any particular feature, service, device, or disability?
Yeah, the test applied would be that of achievability.
Okay, and it would go to for every disability.
Are you referring to the formulation of make it accessible for individuals with disabilities?
Okay. Second question, am I correct that the ultimate ruling on achievability in a particular case will be made by the FCC based upon a complaint? And doesn't that mean the service provider and manufacturer will have a burden of proof and potential liability that extends to every feature of every advanced communication service or device for every disability? And won't that burden of proof and liability only be resolved after the service or device has already been deployed?
I don't know the answer to the first part of that question as to when achievability is measured only upon complaint. I think that to be the case, but I'm not positive. And then pick off the remaining parts of that question again for me.
And won't that burden of proof and liability only be resolved after the service or device has already been deployed, based upon a consumer complaint?
I think that is correct.
Okay. Yeah. Third question, let's imagine a manufacturer concludes it is achievable, and he has 5 devices, to make all 5 of his devices accessible. But let's suppose, however, that it would be less expensive and possible to get to market faster if the manufacturer made all the features accessible for every disability, but only on 2 of his devices, and so sold those devices at discount. Would that be permissible under the amendment?
Under the FCC's existing practice for Section 255 related to telephone equipment, the FCC is permitted to look at sort of all of the products and services that that company has, although there's not a product line approach that you're suggesting. But yeah, the analysis is generally device specific.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to get those for the record before we move, so I think there's areas that we can work together on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stearns. That was a very helpful commentary. Does any other members seek recognition? The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Inslee, Mr. Doyle, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take a moment to highlight a problem that I have with the manager's amendment as it's currently drafted, and I'm going to offer and withdraw an amendment on this issue, so I'd like to work with you on it before the full committee markup. I represent the city of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's the 23rd ranked designated market area, or DMA. The FCC doesn't set these DMAs. The Nielsen Corporation does. And occasionally they make changes to those DMAs, moving counties from one DMA to another, as is their right. But only 40,000 households separate my market from the 26th biggest market. But if Nielsen were to move one county out of the Pittsburgh market in next year's map, or if there were an explosive growth combined with population loss in another market, it could mean that blind people in my district could lose the guarantee of programming with video description. I'm confident that if this were to happen, our local broadcasters would continue to pass through that programming, but there'd be no way for the FCC to enforce that. Secondly, small cable operators have mentioned that they're worried that new requirements or standards might be designed only for digital cable networks. Now, could that force cable operators to update their analog cable plant to digital? I think the answers to both of these problems are to give the FCC the regulatory flexibility they need to apply these rules fairly without onerous regulatory burdens and to update them if there's a need. I'd like to withdraw this amendment, Mr. Chairman, but I hope that I can work with you before the full committee markup to address some of these concerns that I have.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will.
Let me assure the gentleman that we will be pleased to work with you on that question, and we're expecting a series of recorded votes very shortly so that we don't have to come back. Let me suggest that perhaps in lieu of offering the amendment, you just take that assurance, and we'll be working with you in the intervening 2 weeks between now and full committee markup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any other member seek recognition on the manager's amendment? The gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had 5 ideas, all excellent, that we've proposed in amendments we will offer and withdraw. I just wanted to briefly discuss them. We'd like to work with the committee for a moment. First, we think it'd be appropriate to have a study of emergency communication technologies. There's a lot of opportunities out there, not just real-time text. We hope that we can study those. We had an amendment we'll offer a draw in that regard. Second, we had a amendment that would redefine the size of a TV that would be subject to a certain requirement on closed captioning. We have 13 inches. We think the technology, we can go down to 5 safely. Third, we have an amendment that would clearly define telecommunications relay services as interstate services. We think that's an important thing to do for a variety of reasons. Fourth, we have an amendment that will establish a telecommunications relay policy council. We think this is important enough to merit having a council to help make policy. And fifth, we have an amendment requiring a study of video relay service adoption, penetration, and barriers to its adoption. So we'd like to work with the committee. We understand the committee's interested in working with us. We'll look forward to that.
Would the gentleman yield?
You bet.
I'll be very glad to work with the gentleman from Washington on his 5 different issues. And just as Mr. Doyle has accepted assurance of that collaborative work, I would ask if you would do the same, and that might avoid the necessity of your actually offering and withdrawing those amendments subsequently.
You bet. I would follow Coach Mike Doyle to the depths of hell.
Well, I'm not actually asking that you do that, but just not offering the amendments would be enough for today. Does any other member seek recognition? Are there any amendments to the manager's amendment? If not, the question occurs on the manager's amendment in the nature of a substitute. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. There being no further business to come before, I'm sorry? The chair calls up the bill as amended and asks, yes, the motion actually is to forward the bill as amended to the full committee. Is there discussion on the motion? The question occurs on that motion. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is reported favorably to the full committee. There being no further business to come before the subcommittee, the markup stands adjourned.